When I looked at the Democratic National Convention's video, it was somewhere between, to me, like an after-school special and the B cast of like Cabaret or something, right?
Welcome to UnityNow, the podcast where we discuss unity in the face of division. Inspired by the Unity 2020 plan, we strive to unite Americans by highlighting the middle ground between the two dominant parties and promoting the individual over groups. Each episode, we will bring you exciting, well-informed guests and host nuanced conversations about politically charged subjects. Our goal is to bring an end to the ideological war threatening the collective well-being of this great country.
Welcome back to the UnityNow podcast. I'm your host, Toby Davis, and for this episode, I sat down with our friends Heather Blakeslee and Cody Hill. Heather is founder and publisher of the magazine Root Quarterly and sat with us on episode 40. Cody Hill is a former product operations lead at Facebook and discussed that with us back on episode 8. In this episode, we set out to discuss censorship. On January 13th, our post-production team was preparing to publish a video on YouTube. Episode 47, Can We Unite to Defeat the Mandates?, featuring Matt Toon and Louisa Clary, organizers of the Defeat the Mandates March, which occurred in Washington, D.C. on January 23rd. Before we could release this episode publicly, we were notified that the video violated YouTube's terms of service about medical misinformation. We sent an appeal and it was denied within a couple of hours. As mountains of available information continue to build exponentially, is censorship something that we have to simply accept but go around? Or is it a hill worth dying on? Please welcome Heather Blakeslee and Cody Hill. Hi, Heather. How are you?
Hello, Toby Davis. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. So, how are things going at Root Quarterly?
We are just about to start promoting our winter issue and going to print in a couple weeks with the spring issue. And things are going really well. We're excited to kind of expand this summer, but generally speaking, all systems go on our queue.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time tonight to join us again for this special episode about censorship. You joined us on episode 40. And so, yeah, thanks for taking the time. We know you're a busy person.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. And so, Cody Hill, how are you doing tonight, sir?
Doing great, Toby. Thanks for having me on. My second appearance, I think I was on one of the first ones. And yeah, looking forward to chatting with both of you. And yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, when we last spoke with you, it wasn't me; it was a different guest at the or a different host at the time, and I believe you had just left Facebook in the Unity 2020 movement. You talked to us about that. So, what have you been up to since then? Are you over at Twitter or Getter, or how are things going?
Yeah, I got. I'd say I got a little bit disillusioned from big tech and kind of wanted to get out of there. So I'd been working at Facebook for almost 3 years, and it is a great place to work. A lot of smart people there. You get to work on a lot of big problems, but I ended up having some ethical concerns. I think that their business model just creates way more problems than it solves, and it's just too big of a company. And I didn't really feel like I was doing anything to help the world, even though that's kind of what they pitch internally. Happy to talk more about it later, but no, I'm not working at Twitter. I moved from San Francisco to North Carolina. I'm in Raleigh, and I've been doing consulting for different startups here. One of them is around political transparency in state governments, called Upstate North Carolina. So that's what's been consuming most of my time since I left last year.
Okay, very good. Well, again, to you as well, we appreciate you taking the time tonight. We know you're both very busy here on a Wednesday. So we're recording this for everyone on January 26th, and as maybe most of our audience knows by now, there was a march in Washington, D.C. this past Sunday called Defeat the Mandates, and we had recorded an episode with the organizers, and that episode was uploaded to YouTube. And before we could even click the button that publishes it publicly, YouTube let us know that they were blocking that episode due to violating their medical misinformation policy. And so we appealed that decision, of course, because we believed we had put out a fair and honest conversation with these two folks. And YouTube, of course, quickly denied that appeal within a couple of hours. And we then put the episode on Rumble, our first Rumble episode. So we wanted to have this episode as kind of a special episode and bring the two of you on to discuss the issue of censorship. And you both would have unique backgrounds and perspectives, we believe. So Heather, I'll start with you. What is the value of censorship, if any at all? It's kind of the question that's kind of been burning in my mind. Is there a place for what we know as censorship, or is there not?
Right. Well, I mean, this is such a hard question because it's kind of, it is a little bit subjective in terms of where you set dials for things. And I know I'm thinking of also, my libertarian friends here who would, set the dial differently than maybe somebody on the super, super hard left. If it was an issue that was relevant to them or part of their policy agenda, or on the super, super right, they'd say, like, absolutely, you can't, say this or do this. I'm a bit of a free speech absolutist, I think. But that's, it's difficult, especially in a time where what you say could hurt people or what you don't say could hurt people. That's always the case, but obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic and there's kind of misinformation and disinformation everywhere. But as a general principle, I would say, I don't know if I would characterize myself as saying any censorship is okay, but I do think it's, because that means a really specific thing to me in terms of like censorship of art or, censorship of ideas. And that may very well be what some of these big tech companies are doing. But to me, there needs to be a human element in there. And I don't think half the time there is a human element here. They're looking at keywords or they're looking at what have you, and nobody's actually reviewing it. So I think this brings up for me the conversation of also kind of who owns the highway. I think I disagree a little bit with Brett Weinstein that the internet is now just equivalent to an interstate highway or something like that. It's not. It's owned by private companies and they can kind of do whatever they want the way that our system is set up right now. So I also don't know how I feel about, the government having, the internet. So I just feel like we're in a bit of a pickle right now and there isn't an easy answer. And we're going to go through this strange time where things like you just experienced with one of the Unity episodes coming down happened. And it certainly has happened to other people that I know. It happened to Ford Fisher, who we've had in the magazine before with some of his just pure raw footage of things like the Capitol riot, and not being able to post just pure documentary footage. And that seems absolutely crazy to me that you couldn't post what's actually happening on American soil because an algorithm or a person told you that you weren't allowed to see it. That's pure and simple censorship to me. When it gets into what the algorithms are pulling down, it's somewhere between censorship and poor management. And to Cody's point earlier with his comment that Facebook just might be too big of a company, we have a scale problem in nearly every system that we're working within. So that would be some of the opening considerations I would think about.
Yeah, and Cody, I'll let you chime in as well with the same kind of sort of question. And for both of you, I keep thinking about like when I was a kid and I had like maybe 5 channels on the TV and, my parents just would not let me watch a certain channel if there was a bad news story on or something, really graphic or something, just change the channel. But to the point of, of a scale problem, maybe it just can no longer be that simple. I don't know. Cody, your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, this is kind of like the question of our time a little bit. It seems like something that we're not going to have a great answer for a while. And I think part of me definitely agrees with the free speech absolutism. I definitely am someone who I probably agree with that most of the time. I think that there are certainly scenarios and things that should be off limits when we know that something will, incite violence. We know that something will cause bad outcomes for a lot of people. I think they use that a lot of times as an excuse to censor things because they say that these bad things will happen. But in reality, a lot of what ends up happening is that it just radicalizes more and more people because when their views that they either know to be true or that they feel to be true are kind of systematically being shut down, that just confirms in people that others are out to get me, and it puts them in a mindset where I'm going to retreat even further into my corner and be even more, whether it is more radicalized to whether it's far left, far right. That's my concern is like the overt and just like very obvious and naked censorship is literally just making more of the problem that they're saying they're trying to get rid of. Because I have spent time looking at kind of the far right, far left corners of the internet, and a lot of the growth of those is purely resentment that people don't take them seriously or people don't even like hear them out. And there are points on both sides which are like relatively reasonable, and then there are some that are too far, and it's like the only way to not keep things from continuing to radicalize and getting both sides of the spectrum, growing both sides of the spectrum, is to have voices be heard that feel like they are not being heard, and then to combat them with better answers if you think that you have them. And it's just a shame that with these huge platforms, I think what's going to happen is just more and more alternative platforms are going to come up. You guys said that you went on Rumble and BitChute or and the other ones. I think that market force is what is going to end up happening, and what that's going to do is just continue to polarize. It's going to continue to divide society. It's going to be the conservative types will be on these three websites, and the liberal types will be on these four, whatever. And it just like overall is not healthy for cohesion and unity, which is like what a lot of these big platforms, portend to be all about. And, this is a way to, I worked at Facebook for 3 years, and I worked on a product that was all an international market. So all connecting the world, bringing the internet to the far reaches of Asia, Africa, Latin America, all these emerging markets. And I traveled there, Bangladesh, Peru, Indonesia, and it was our job to like get internet to still half the world does not even use the internet really. So all these stories that they tell internally of the happiness of connecting the world when all the negative externalities that are being created by this mandate to keep people's emotions in different states that are most profitable, essentially, when that is just a huge underlying problem. And a lot of that is just kind of in tandem with this free speech issue. So, I would say I'm an absolutist, but obviously we have to figure out the things that are too far. And if we can't even talk about that, then these are the types of conversations, these podcasts is where you figure out what those things are. And if you're not even willing to have that, then they'll never be figured out, and people will just get more radicalized. So.
Thank you for tuning into the UnityNow podcast. We are a 100% volunteer organization dedicated to highlighting the sane middle ground between the two dominant parties and focusing on the individual over groups. If you've enjoyed this program, please consider supporting us through our Patreon. Links to our support page, as well as merchandise and full episodes, can be found at our website at UnityNowPodcast.com. Now, back to our show.
True, and to the point of free speech absolutely being the point here, it's like that whole thing where we talk about somebody yelling fire in a crowded movie theater, right? Well, okay, let's talk about that. Maybe we haven't talked about that enough. Is it the fault? So if it's stampede that we're talking about is the dangerous risk there for shouting that word. So is the blame on the person really yelling fire, or is the blame on the individuals who do all the panicking when maybe there's clearly not, risk of fire visibly or smoke that they smell or something like that? That's, should we pull that out a little more? I don't know.
Well, Toby, I think one of the reasons why this is so hard to get down to is that in that example, there's a clear harm that might occur, right? And so what we're all arguing about right now is, when is there going to be actual harm caused by a conversation or a piece of information that is either withheld or disclosed? And one of the things that we are all really struggling with right now is, it used to be, as you were just saying, there were only a couple of channels on the TV, or there were only a couple of radio stations. And so there was a little bit more of a consensus of what available information everyone had to kind of make their own decisions. But we've, for a long time now, have been sliding into this area where we don't trust the experts anymore, right? Because the news media has broken down. We've all read all of the stories about how bad things like the replication crisis are, particularly within the scientific community. We know that there are bad incentives everywhere. We know that there are also now bad actors, including, foreign governments and other kinds of people who don't share our values per se, that are trying to actively influence the American populace one way or the other because it suits their political aims. And so what is a quaint example of shouting fire in a crowded building, it conceptually, obviously, it makes you ask that question, where is there harm? But the system is now so complicated and so global and so badly incentivized, and there are so many people in it that are actively trying to provide that misinformation, that's why it feels so hard to get a clear answer on that to me.
Yeah. And sorry, Cody, did you want to add anything?
No, I was just gonna say, like, the the active part, like the incentives that are created for someone who actually does want to come in and do harm, those are just going to continue to get bigger and bigger, and that's when things can actually be dangerous, like she was mentioning, with foreign governments or just people who are so disenfranchised that it's I just want to throw a bomb on the system. And there's just going to be more and more people like that because they've never felt that they were ever given respect or heard out or had their viewpoints somewhat legitimized. And they may have viewpoints that aren't great. But just the growth in people who are so nihilistic to where it gives them more, it gives them pleasure to go and take advantage of the system in a real harmful way is something that I think about a lot.
And it's easier and easier, as Cody just said, you use the bomb example. It's easier and easier to make that bomb now, right? It's the technology is so far ahead on some of these world-ending kind of scenarios that we're going to be there sooner or later. And the existential threats that we're facing are much different than we used to face 50 years ago, 100 years ago, because it will soon be the case that someone can manufacture a bug in their basement and release that onto the world, or any kind of bomb that would do localized damage. And so how do you help those use the tools that we have, what the internet being one of them, to distribute information, to do the opposite of what the system is incentivized to do right now, which is divide us and stoke our worst instincts and our most base, fear-based, anger-based emotions, the kind of high intensity emotions that Molly Crockett studies at Yale when she's looking at what the internet is doing to us, and try to figure out a way to use it for what it was initially, for, which was trying to bring people together. And I've thought a lot more about this since I first talked to you, in terms of, what does a regional print magazine have to do with any of this? And for me, it feels even more and more important to create that shared sense of reality with people who are actually in your proximity, that you actually have connections to, and within a group of people who are opting into a particular kind of conversation where there are standards around how we're setting sources or what we think is a responsible conversation. Because unlike the internet, and unlike Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook, I am a publisher. And so those laws that we have governing speech with publishers apply to me, but they don't apply to the internet. And so I have to be much more careful about what I publish, because that's that's the law that we have right now. And so for me, it makes me really angry. And I wrote about this in the fall issue, that if I'm waking up in the morning on Sunday and reading a front page COVID story from the New York Times that, I talked to my partner about, and he's like, oh yeah, that fact was debunked 3 days ago. And yet there it is in the New York Times. So I'm the little guy over here trying to go to primary news sources and studies and look at things and talk to people and try to figure it out, because I do have to treat, for instance, a conversation with Bret Weinstein and Heather Heying in a particular way. We have to disclose certain information. We've got to contextualize certain information. I think on a small scale with a magazine like us, it's fine to do it. And we were actually talking with them, not about COVID stuff, but about art and culture stuff, which is more within our realm. But I do understand why somebody like Sam Harris is like, I'm just going to not boost this particular signal right now, because I'm not sure about how much good or harm it's going to do. And so precautionary principle, don't do it.
Yeah, and it's a fair point about not boosting a particular signal and, having to be careful when you're writing those articles as well. It's like somebody posted this in our podcast team Discord last week, and it was a story about reactionaries now, and talking about people that are ending up on the whole other side of some issues just because of the reaction. They're seeing the truth, but maybe they're reacting, too fast and too hard, and it's just creating that little war that's just gonna, keep developing. And we don't want this podcast to be like that. And we're trying to be careful here as well. So how can we we just want to do it better, right? And not make the problem worse. We want to find a way to do it better. And so how do we do that? With this mountain of information, like you just said, you read a story that was debunked 3 days before you saw it, in front of you. Well, what do you do about that? How do you believe? Why did you believe your friend in that situation? How maybe he got it wrong.
Well, so because we're going to publish this in the magazine, my initial reaction is to trust the person that I most trust in the world, and he, I know what his editorial standards are, and I know that he, for instance, never says a fact unless he has checked the primary source himself and feels like he is able to discern from that information whether something is true or not. I think a lot of us, as a side note, are kind of, we have a group of people, thinkers, authors, places, organizations that we trust because we have kind of verified over time that they, generally speaking, give us good information. But what I did do then was immediately go to the internet and look it up. And sure enough, it had been also widely reported that the actual hospital that had been misquoted had put out a press release. And I read the press release, and what the New York Times said wasn't actually true. It was flat out false. So those kinds of things are the things that make me mad, because the New York Times has deep pockets, and they've got all of these, Harvard and Yale and Columbia educated journalism students and fellows who are supposed to be doing this work. And yet here I am trying to enjoy a Sunday, and instead looking at, press releases from some unbeknownst to me hospital out in, the Midwest somewhere, to understand what's true or not about the top news story in a paper that I subscribe to. And that seems bonkers to me. It seems absolutely bonkers to me.
Yeah, one of the one of the really unfortunate things is that just the everyone's opinion, every single opinion that anyone has, you can go find data or a study or a story that confirms it, and it can look very legitimate, and it can be very legitimate just because just the amount of data that we have has done something like it's gone up like 100x, and it goes up like I think 100x in the past like 10 years, and it's just getting incrementally more and more. So then the amount of different angles and ways of spinning something, or ways of like taking a data point and putting it through a different prism, thus creating a different narrative that can confirm a certain population's thoughts. Like, I mean, a lot of this problem is just that there's so much information, and all that information can be hyper targeted to everyone's unique mentality, personality, political beliefs, character traits. And I mean, that's what Facebook and Google do, is like match up all of these unique traits that everyone has and gives them the information that keeps them on their phone or on the internet the longest. And that is just like way too powerful for humans to deal with. So, and another thing is like you mentioned the concept of reactionaries, and this is something I think about a lot, and I think that there's going to be the left reactionaries and kind of socialism type stuff. There's going to be the right reactionaries with kind of more the fascism type stuff. One hopeful thing is that I see a lot of more kind of centrist reactionaries who are just kind of like more upset at kind of the structures and these very unserious people that we have in government and at the heads of a lot of organizations who are trying to protect narratives, who are trying to kind of protect the legitimacy of their own organizations. That's really what they're doing. And you can't really even fault them for doing it. Anyone would do it in that situation. They're doing what any human would do. But the fact that them doing that is just collectively dragging the psyches of America like through the mud and creating more reactionaries is what really gets me upset. Is like mainstream news is obviously losing a lot of relevancy, legitimacy with a lot of people, which is great. And I love the fact that Heather has started the regional like print paper. Like, that's so beautiful. Just planting those ideas in people's minds that like you can do something that might sound crazy to some people like that. But that is like those types of thoughts and examples are very positive, because that's the type of stuff where it's like, okay, let's settle down. Let's explore different perspectives. This kind of Twitter brain mentality where everything is summed up so quickly and then it's tweeted, and then it's like, let's look at everyone's reactions, and based on how many responds or likes, or if someone with the right opinion says something in a snarky way, then that entire point is like lost, or like they won this little silly engagement. And how a lot of very smart people's thoughts on the world and opinions are created and judged just by that type of very vapid interaction is really wild. And that drives a lot of news. A lot of reporters care most about just getting the most interaction on Twitter, and there is a very the way to do that is not a great way. It is a systematic way. They all know how to do it. There's a template for it, and it's all about just getting the most eyeballs and the most retweets. And it's a lot to deal with. But I am hopeful when I see more kind of, I consider myself more of like a centrist reactionary, where it's like, hey, like people on the right are not bad, people on the left are not bad. But can we not at least acknowledge that sometimes like there are some ideas on both sides that are like not terrible? And so that's kind of what upsets me, because the division stuff just keeps like structures in place and keeps things from actually changing and being able to help people. I mean, you look at the government and it's like, how could anyone like take government like seriously? Like, look at these clowns up there. Like, all, going out trying to build their brands on Twitter, trying to like have all these gotcha moments. Like having a gotcha moment on Twitter is far more important to a legislator than like passing something. And then it in turn causes us to expect much less of them. So in a weird way, if they ever were to like do something and like create something positive, like pass a bill that was very positive, like actually make healthcare reform and like make it work, if they ever were to do that, then people would actually expect that they could do stuff. So they actually want to be seen as like, oh, we can't get it done. And so it's very weird. And I'm rambling and way off topic here, but these are just several things that I think about far too much and bewildered that most of my smart friends have no idea about or don't even think about. It is crazy to me.
Well, Heather, are we eventually going to get to where like everybody on the left has like Twitter and other social media stuff, and then everybody on the right is going to get the Getter and, conservative social media stuff? And when we're in the middle, we now have two sides that are, telling us we're both evil because we're trying to give both of them, a little room here. And now we have no social media in the middle here. And we're going to just have to rely on things like, your magazine.
Well, I mean, for the sake of the magazine, I hope so, but also for the sake of American democracy, right? So, the original purpose and kind of emergence of the fourth estate, I've been studying a bit more recently. A lot of people will refer to the like media and publications as the fourth estate and their ability to kind of transmit information and shape culture by including some things and not including other things. Any publication that you do or any endeavor that you have like that is going to include some gatekeeping. And I was like, oh yeah, the fourth estate, of course. And then I was like, oh, but what are the first three, right? And I had to go back to my, Western civilization history and look at really what that meant in Europe for most of the Middle Ages and through the early modern period. And it was, you had the church and you had the nobility and you had the commoners. And liberal democracy emerged in part because of the printing press, because it democratized the information that was able to be given to people. And I think that that's a really, really good thing. And I've been thinking recently about, what do I have to do, for instance, at my magazine to kind of launch a capital campaign to rebuild the fourth estate and to do that in a regional way that serves this region with not only good information about the kinds of things that we're talking about and trying to cast these sort of conversations as things that are relevant to all of us and that we need to think about in ways that people who don't have time to listen to 400 hours of podcasts every week can kind of relate to. That's the other thing. But I do think it helps bring the temperature down when it's in print and there's not a comment section and we're doing it quarterly. So we're not about breaking news. We're about looking back and kind of analysis and kind of what that next conversation might be. And it's even more important to me in my mind that this is something that foundations and, I don't know about the government, but, private donors and other people really invest in at this point all over the country. Like, I wish there was a magazine like Root Quarterly in every region of the country right now so that those folks could decide which conversations were important to them and to have really good faith conversations then about how a community wanted to approach something, because we are too big of a place. This goes back to the scale thing. We are too big of a place with too many different kinds of people who come from too many different ideological backgrounds to ever actually agree on everything. So we're going to have to get back to basics about the things that we do want the government to be in our heads about. And as someone who has traveled to China and seen what it looks like, even in the English language newspapers, when you can see very clearly that the Chinese government has inserted a sentence, about something, or they talked about something in a particular way, and know how chilling that is. Or to know that when, my father went to Russia, to the Soviet Union at the time, after the Chernobyl accident, to help them understand what had happened and that it would not happen again. And like, he wasn't, we couldn't even send letters back and forth to the kids of the families he met, because the censors would rip them open and black things out, or sometimes the letters would just disappear. Like I've personally experienced and seen what it looks like when the government controls everything, and it's not good. And I think Americans have this idea that liberal democracy is just going to keep going off into the beautiful future in some sort of weird manifest destiny kind of way, and it's not. And we're at a really critical juncture right now where we have to have these conversations, and we have to figure out not only what our core values are going to be as a country and in these regional communities, but then also how we're going to operationalize talking with one another. Whether that's a combination of regional print media with kind of members only, essentially, social media that connects certain groups of people, or whatever that formula looks like, I think is still in development. But there's no doubt that that is the point that we are in the conversation, and that these conversations have to be had.
Yeah, like it would be great to have. I mean, the death of local journalism is like a big cause of a lot of these different problems, and with somewhat with the kind of mainstream media or the mainstream sources that being relevant to like everyone in such a big diverse country, and like that's what like the news is, and that's what like the kind of big importance of the country is placed on, like that is definitely not great. It would be great if we could get back to that. I was a big fan of Andrew Yang when he ran for president. One of the things he talked about was investing in local journalism, like actually putting money into that. And like I can't think of anyone left, right, like who would really be against that. Like there wouldn't be. I mean, there would be some people, but it would mostly be the media that is against that for the most part. And so that just shows you that, like, if someone ran on that, that would be such a great thing. You could coalesce a ton of people around it, but yet, do you hear anyone talking about that? That conversation isn't really allowed to happen on a large scale. But that could be a great way to create new jobs, to have like a positive message for people across political lines. But that there's no real incentive to unite people across political lines, or actually like bring down the temperature of the country. And a lot of that has to do with like the advertising business model. And that was a lot of what I was upset with at Facebook, is as long as everything is just about engagement for engagement's sake, which is what Facebook cares about at the end of the day, which, like, by the way, working at like the headquarters in Facebook, you've never seen, 15,000 people on campus. I'm walking around all these human robots all day, and everyone there, like, very smart, very like has all the right opinions, very liberal, very much I'm saving the world. And you've never like been in a group of so many like educated, smart, liberal people who do not talk about all the completely negative externalities they're creating, to where at the end of the day they're trying to get teenage girls to stay on their phone for another 10, 20, 30 minutes a day. And like that's what they're working hard to do. And so I think that just that, that ad, like, ideally there should be some great product out there where you log on and you are able to kind of interact with someone in a way where like you learn something from them, or you could give them some type of like someone different than you who thinks differently politically, maybe some different part in the country. You engage in some type of conversation, some swipe thing where you ask questions or have a little video about what you feel about something, and then that drives like further engagement and could somehow bring people to like at least see the human side of someone else. But like we're so used to not doing that, and that thought is like literally like demonized, and like the thought of even doing something positive like that would be like laughed out of the room when everyone would agree that like trying to be better to other people, everyone would agree that being better to other people is a good thing. But like actually trying to operationalize that or facilitate that cannot happen in the current economy with the current incentives.
I will say, though, that it is happening a little bit now.
Yeah.
And I want to give a plug for Braver Angels here, because I volunteer for them. And that's actually expressly what they are doing. So like, I was able, as a fairly liberal city dweller, to sign up for a one-on-one conversation in which I was able to have a Zoom call with a dairy farmer from Iowa and like hear what his life is about and feel like what is going. So they have one-on-one conversations. They have bridging the divide conversations across racial divides, across political divides, and then they also are bringing people into dialogue with one another, very carefully moderated, so that you're not there to convince the other side of your policy position or your ideology, but actually to ask good faith questions so that you can clarify why the other person thinks the way that they do. And it radically changes the tenor of the conversation and what you're kind of trying to get out of it. And to the point that Cody was just making about, kind of getting laughed out of the room, I think you do get laughed out of the room when you say that that's possible, because the people who are doing the laughing are the new, back to the fourth estate metaphor, which isn't a metaphor, it's actually what's going on. The people who used to be the commoners, those people who would have been the beat reporters at the local daily, or the folks who are checking out the school board meetings and trying to keep city council accountable and trying to understand what the budgets were like for capital projects in little towns and regions all over the country. A lot of those people didn't have college degrees. They were working class people who worked at the newspapers in their towns. And so not only has the fourth estate been diminished and its systems kind of screwed up by the new information economy, the people who are now only sitting at places like the New York Times or pick another big city newspaper, even maybe a little less so the Philadelphia Inquirer, because we're a bit more working class here, but they have no connection at all. Like, they are the new nobility, right? So you've got this new class of nobility that replaced the old nobility, and the commoners, quote unquote, are still out in the cold with all of that. But what I'm seeing now, which does give me hope, is that the commoners, the people who are like not part of the mainstream media, the people who do care about what happens at a local school board meeting, they're starting to find one another through places like Braver Angels or through organizations like the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, and they're talking and they're organizing. And I think that is one of the reasons that we're starting to see kind of surprising elections happening right now. And I think both you, Cody, and also you, Toby, also sort of said, we might be radicalized back to being centrists. It's like those areas are not places we want to be. Yeah. So we're meeting back in the center and saying, what the hell happened?
Yeah, I love the concept of that. I think it's kind of inevitable. It will. I also, it's unfortunate, but like, I don't think that a lot of this has to do with personality type. A lot of this, like, many people who are not in this kind of heterodox world, will look at these types of conversations. A lot of people, well, not everyone, but they'll look at it and they like won't kind of understand even what we're saying in a weird way. And I look at a lot of kind of just, Fox News or MSNBC, and I'm baffled that people like aren't just like laughing at the TV the whole time.
Who watches that?
And
right?
so a lot of this is kind of personality type driven. We all have our unique personality traits. I think the people who are more heterodox are kind of fall within a range of these personality traits, and so it's not going to be everyone who does it. And the people kind of on the two more liberal, more conservative side, they're going to continue to be more radicalized into their corners, which is not great. But I think that we can kind of peel off the people who are just continuing to look at kind of what is going on both sides and see the illegitimacy of it. And the Braver Angels stuff, I'd like to look into that and maybe volunteer as well. That's really neat.
I highly recommend it. And Cody, the other thing I wanted to add on to what you just said, because it's kind of an aesthetics thing, and that's certainly something I have to think about with the magazine. Like, I don't usually watch mainstream television, right? I haven't for years, and sometimes, like during an election season, if I want to kind of check out a final convention, or when the Capitol riot happened. I wanted to see how it was being covered. I was flipping between Fox News and MSNBC, trying to see how they were framing the same thing, right? That was happening, to triangulate and try to figure out what was happening based on the biased views that they had. But it is a little bit laughable. And Toby, to your propaganda question, right? What is the difference between, good information and propaganda? When I looked at the Democratic National Convention's video, it was somewhere between, to me, like an after school special and the B cast of like Cabaret or something, right? And then like I looked at the Republican National Convention, and it looked like I'm going to use the N word, I'm sorry here, a Nazi rally. Like it was just like, very Leni Riefenstahl, like straight lines and flags everywhere and all of that kind of thing. And I just thought to myself, like, who could possibly be looking at this and not having this reaction? But of course, lots of people do. So I don't know what you guys have to say about that, but I think the aesthetics here is really a lot of what people are paying attention to as a signal to what they're supposed to trust based on their tribal affiliations.
Yeah, I know people in the middle like you guys, a lot of people in the middle, but I also know some people that are kind of still stuck in the far right echo chambers, right? And I see their perspective on some things, and, they probably were watching that Republican convention and maybe they were liking it, but I also am seeing there, they're seeing the reactions from the left, right? From things like Rogan talking about doctors and stuff like that. And then they're seeing the reaction from the right to fight back from the left. And then they're starting to see some of the truth in some stuff. And maybe they're moving into the middle a little bit on some information, and maybe we shouldn't worry about, getting, YouTube taking down one of our episodes. Maybe we're a little crazy for saying that's, so bad and stuff like that. And, we put it on Rumble, and that episode has 320 views right now. And that's pretty good for us for so soon releasing an episode. And so maybe we have enough of these things to go around these roadblocks, and we shouldn't worry as much as we do. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what'll continue to end up happening, is just new and new platforms will grow and then get bigger, and then themselves will be echo chambers, and it'll just be, there's 10 personas of a given platform, and which one do you fit into? And, that's kind of the direction that it's headed. And there's some good things to that as well. One thing I think about a lot is, like, people are so much more susceptible to so when Heather was talking about like the aesthetics and kind of the cultural signaling that each side does, I mean, that all the time you see Fox News versus, and I don't like I watch it mostly just to kind of understand, like, it's entertainment for me. It's like, wow, like it's just fascinating to see how it's going. I don't watch it for information or anything, of course, but that signaling becomes more important to people when they feel like, basically to like disenfranchised people. So people who don't feel like they have any possibility of like having a good life, or being able to like advance and kind of live up to maybe what they thought was going to happen previously in their lives, like growing up. Those are the people who are the most susceptible to just caring about the cultural stuff. They've already given up on the fact that, there's not going to be some great thing that happens in my life, and it's not like the government is probably going to do that for me. I think a lot about these cycles of inspiration that people go throughout their life, or maybe they got really into Obama, or they got really into Bush, or they got really into some ideology at some point when they were younger, and inevitably it usually ends up kind of like disappointing you, or you get into some like business opportunity or something and it like doesn't work out. And a lot of people are just kind of resigning and going into nihilism. And at that point, that's when they are most susceptible to just wanting to put up a middle finger and be like, okay, the right wing, this kind of more authoritarian looking stuff is like, well, F it. It's like kind of cool because, it is a middle finger to the people that kind of culturally are against me. And it makes, and it kind of, it makes them less susceptible to seeing the humanity on other sides. And all that is to say is that when the wealth inequality continues to grow at such a high rate, all-time record highs now, that is kind of the underlying basis of all this being able to happen. If more people felt like they had a realistic shot, they would be more able to care about things outside of just themselves and confirming their own kind of like cultural righteousness. And the fact that our economy continues to work for fewer and fewer people is just going to create more susceptible people to being in these kind of mindless areas on the right and the left. And a big help to people being able to be, whether it's more heterodox or just being able to see outside of themselves more, would be to, I don't want to say like wealth redistribution. I'm a fan of UBI, Universal Basic Income, but some type of shift to where people actually felt like they now have a better shot at like having a life for themselves. And I hope that someone can figure that out, because that would help bring down a lot of polarization.
Well, and Heather, I wanted to touch real quick on, you talked about turning the dials, like who gets to turn the dials, who gets to moderate things. And you talked about, you have different rules for publications than things like, places like Facebook and, the tech giants. Talk about those different rules and who, if anyone, any one single person can be, turning the dials for somebody else.
Well, I mean, first of all, one of the things would be things like libel laws, right? So we have fairly lax libel laws in this country compared to someplace like Britain, but we still have them. And so I can't, slander you randomly and say, Toby Davis is a thus and such, or Cody Hill is a thus and such, things that are absolutely untrue and things that are, not within your actual character, or say that you did something that you didn't do, because you can sue me then, right, for doing that. Facebook isn't considered a publisher. So when someone does a deep fake and has a sitting president say something that he or she did not say, what are the consequences for that? So you can imagine that that's one of the ways in which that's happening. Facebook is also I'll just keep picking on Facebook, not because Cody's here, but because it's easy and people know it, but it's like, the scale thing is also different, right? So, I am a small publisher. I own my company. You could easily see who owns the company and who has published the work or what have you. If I do something that is, if I publish a fact that is wrong, people are going to expect me to put a correction up there. They know who to go to. There's a human person here who's going to say, my bad, we misquoted that statistic, or we had an editorial error in the process there. And so I personally will take responsibility for that as the publisher. There's no one at Facebook to take personal responsibility for that, right? So, I'd be interested to hear what Cody has to say about that too, but that's one of the biggest differences. And the other thing is, and this is back to maybe kind of like Dunbar number kind of stuff too, or what the Overton window is in a particular community. Like, there's only so many people that can have a coherent conversation as well. And there's only so many things that you will talk about within that conversational group. And to Cody's point earlier about, do some people listening to this even have any idea what we're talking about? Maybe no, but probably most of them do, because they were kind of opting into this conversation here. And we're able to kind of work it out. But if you're at a great big faceless corporation, and there are many of them out, I mean, Twitter is there and Facebook is there, and now Instagram is in there, and TikTok has gone crazy. It's almost like no one's in charge. No one's accountable for the information that's out there. So to me, that's one of the biggest differences, is that the scale is different. I'm a human being who has to be responsible both to editorial standards that we've set for ourselves, as well as to my community, people that I look in the eye and say, yes, I published that article and I know you didn't agree with it, but this is the conversation that has to be had right now. And so we're going to have the conversation. And it may not even be my personal opinion about something, but I am able as a publisher to kind of give you a framework for that conversation that helps you get away into it and understand maybe what both sides of an argument are. And there's no obligation on the part of Facebook to do that. As Cody said, they're literally just trying to keep my niece on Instagram for a half hour more a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's what it comes down to. Like, there are, like, trust and safety teams within Facebook. It is there's so much content, always being uploaded. It is very hard to police all of that. They were brilliant in not being a publisher, because now they don't have to worry about any of that. It's all just purely an engagement machine. And I mean, maybe that would be a good thing for them to be forced to be a publisher. It's like, I don't really know the best way to regulate them. I know that they definitely have a lot of influence with legislators, and they will be probably the people who are helping to guide that regulation. They know that they need to be regulated. They probably want to be regulated, or at least have the appearance of being regulated. And so I think that will probably happen, but it will be done in a way to where it kind of entrenches their monopoly in a way, or kind of overall is not unbeneficial to them. But in terms of that, it's purely, everyone is focused on their goal there. Everyone is and their goals are keeping you on the platform longer and getting more people to sign in one time per month so they can count them as a user. Those are like the two things that Facebook cares about. And it is, I mean, the big reason why I left was that I was working with all these very smart people. I literally sat between two people that went to Harvard, and these are the kind of good, righteous kind of winners with all the right opinions, who went to the good schools and have the good backgrounds and came from the right families. And
to Heather's point, these are the nobles.
These are the nobles. And like, I suppose I'm like from that class a little bit. I mean, I went to good schools and everything, but there's just no kind of self-reflection, no introspection. There is, I'm sure there are people who think about the negative externalities of just keeping people on their phone, but that isn't ever really talked about. When that whistleblower came out and brought that bombshell report that said they ignored the fact that it was causing like mental problems for teenage girls, and it was supposed to be like, everyone knows that. And if you work in tech, you know that the amount of research that they carry out on every little thing about Facebook there is crazy. Of course they knew that. And so the fact that they came out with that and it was like this big bombshell it was just kind of weird to me. It was like, are they like setting this up to be able to take a part in like their eventual regulation?
Speaking
Who knows?
And it looked a little like,
it was a little bit too perfect, yeah, and a little bit too like obvious as well. Mm-hmm. It just, they're like, so I see technology. A big reason why I left was that, so technology basically goes into industries and makes them more efficient. That's what like technology does. And I think of Facebook and all these apps as basically making like the communication industry more efficient. And to me, we do not need to be able to communicate more efficiently. We have innovated the hell out of communicating and being in touch and making everything happen so quickly. But yet a lot of our highest paid and smartest people keep going into further and further make every little thing happen a millisecond faster. And because there's so much, profit incentive there. And to me, what I am working at a startup called Upstate North Carolina, which is like government. So I tried to look across industries what are the least disrupted industries by technology? Like, where is technology kind of repelled? And that, I mean, the main one is basically politics and government, because technology makes things kind of work quicker and makes things more transparent. And that's kind of like that is basically the enemy of, of government and the political process, unfortunately. But I just more people talking about this type of stuff and having gone through it and rejecting it and being able to understand that there are humans on both sides, and that also, like, we should be like, I don't want to say shaming, but like it should be like there should be some type of moral thing to where, like, oh, you hate someone who has a different political opinion than you, like that looks bad on you, actually. Like, you're actually a bad person for hating someone who, because of the way that they grew up and where they grew up and their personality traits and the experiences that they went through, they believe a certain way, and yet you're kind of this empathetic person who or claims that, but you actually literally hate them. Like, that's actually a stain on you. And so I would love if people thought more like that, but
and that's,
maybe we'll get there.
You just essentially defined what effective polarization is. Cody, it's not just that you disagree with a policy position of someone on the other side. It's that you think they're a terrible person.
Yeah.
Right? Because they have a political affiliation, which can and should change over the course of one's life as you get new information in or your values or priorities shift. And to connect, that a little bit to Toby, your original kind of opening salvo around your parents saying you can't watch that channel, and also Cody, you talking about the folks that you worked with at Facebook and other places, like, not really, it's like they're drones. It's like they're making a system more efficient, and they're really smart, and so they're able to do that, but the end result of that system is not their problem, right? It's like another example of the banality of evil. And so the people, and if you have a child, we have to start culturally saying, be careful. Like, don't give your kid a phone before they're however, whatever age, or like limit their screen time, or don't allow them to use social media apps until they have more fully developed a sense of their own personhood and their own values and their own friendship networks, so that they have that to fall back on when the inevitable glass illusion shatters that Twitter is not real world, or that Tumblr isn't real, or that Twitter isn't the real world. And we also have to make it more socially unacceptable for people to work at these companies and to just not care what the end result is. I really don't believe in the whole, I think it was Melissa Mayer who wrote Lean In, but it's like, I don't want to lean into working at a company whose values I find reprehensible, even if I get to be the woman in the CEO spot. I'm just not going to do that. And so there is a kind of personal responsibility thing here. There's a family responsibility thing here. There's a community responsibility thing here. And we have to do a values reset and decide what kind of country we want to be and what kind of communities and conversations we want to have.
Yeah, all fair points. And I agree with the assessment of don't give that teenager the phone as a parent. And I certainly, my 15-year-old has a phone, but he has no social media, and it's not allowed. And I do have an app that controls that. And, to your point, Cody, the people that are just trying to make it more efficient, that's all they want to do, right? But I think that's the problem. It's like the minute more efficient becomes, well, they don't need to see that piece of information. They don't need that information. It's inefficient for them to see this information. Now they have become the arbitrators of the information, right? They are now turning the dials a little bit. And in a tech giant space, whether it's Facebook or YouTube or Google, I mean, they're turning it for billions at a time, unfortunately. And so is it, like you said, Heather, is it just down to the individuals and their, parents not giving access to kids? Or is it, for censorship of information, is it just up to us to find other information elsewhere, individually here, or who is the arbitrators of the arbitrators? Like, if we're going to regulate Facebook or YouTube so that they're not, censoring, well, aren't we in a sense censoring them at the same time. And, how big, Heather, do you think it, Root Quarterly could get before it'd be okay for somebody else to come in and, regulate what you say?
Um, so we're still very much under the radar, and I don't think there's anything that even begins to cross the line on the content that we would have from a kind of government censorship standpoint. That is more
Yeah.
going to be, what do I feel comfortable publishing, given that I'm really sticking my neck out, allowing people to have disparate views, because I'm sitting in a fairly, pretty liberal city right now, but I have connections to other people who have different ideologies. My family is very mixed politically. So for me, it's no big deal to talk to a libertarian or a Republican, right? Because they're people who are in my social circles and family and that kind of thing. There are so many liberals around who, like, it's like talking to the enemy if you even have a conversation. So I don't know that we would run afoul of something from a censorship standpoint on that front, but I do think sometimes about the fact that if someone wanted to get in the way of me producing this magazine and giving it to the people who subscribe, they would almost need to commit a felony and mess with the mail. Because, I'm not saying anything illegal, and I'm not even seeing anything crazy. Like, everything in the magazine is perfectly reasonable to be talking about to the point of our conversation here. But you can't demonetize me, right? Because there are individual people giving me money for subscriptions, and you can't take my episode down from YouTube, because that's not how we deliver the product. So we are an intensely inefficient product that is put together over months based on the information that the staff and I are reading and bringing to the conversation, and all of the other conversations like this that we have. And we're thinking about that and then giving it back to you in a way that's hopefully coherent and hopefully gives you new information or a different perspective, and in a way that I hope doesn't leave anyone feeling shamed or blamed or talked down to in any way. We're trying to have an adult conversation over here. So even if we had 10,000 subscribers, I don't know that we would be in a position to be censored. In my mind, it's more, how has the cultural conversation changed, and how have punitive measures been taken against people on social media, or have they been doxxed? Have they been this? I worry a little bit more about a crazy lefty like telling people where I live, and then having people throw tomatoes at my house. I don't know, pick a thing. But I worry a little bit more about that. And so there's a bit more self-censorship that goes on for me, based on the world that has been created by social media.
And fair point. And, I guess the question is, and I'll give it to you, Cody, as an outsider of the, Root Quarterly publication. So is there somebody that can start a same regional publication, but then maybe their incentive is to make more money, and then they start a website, and they maybe get on social media, and they, bring in more writers, and eventually they get big enough to where they can't really control all the information very well. And there's people that are incentivized to get things out faster, right, and get people to click on stuff. And now all of a sudden they are only showing maybe one side. And if they're on the wrong social media or YouTube or something, maybe they're going to get blocked from the wrong side, or saying the dirty I word that we said on this last episode.
Yeah. The interesting thing is, so it's a really good question. So the way I look at it is like everything that starts with of pure of intention, that Heather started hers very pure of intention. People probably thought she was crazy, and maybe still do. I don't. I think you're awesome. But everything that starts as a do-good type thing, always corrupts over time, naturally. It kind of has to, in a weird way, if it grows, basically. So with growth always will come more people, will come thus more kind of human nature, more kind of ability to want to kind of cut off some of the tenets a little bit or shave them down, where Google was, do no evil at one point. And that's just literally unavoidable in a way. That is just how every system works. Every organization corrupts over time, and then eventually their only goal is to just protect the existence of their organization. That's pretty much like the government now. However, I still definitely think it's worth it to continue to do this type of stuff, because starting from that point, I don't think Heather thinks she's ever going to get as big as CNN, but even starting from that point and to whatever point they get to, that will be so much good that has been done, and will attract a much better caliber of a person than someone who would want to go and just career climb at a mainstream news organization. So the amount of good that she could do from going to a 1-person operation, I'm not sure how many you have, to a 100-person operation, that would be phenomenal. That would do so much good. It's not even worth, in a weird way, thinking about okay, it'll at some point they'll be, they'll start self-censoring a little bit, or so just kind of planning these little good ideas and good organizations that grow maybe slowly or can only reach to a certain point, I think is a great thing either way.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, I think so. If you, I'm going to use maybe some just biology examples. It's I'm not creating an elephant, right? Let's say I'm creating a mouse. I designed a mouse that is supposed to be small, and mice have a particular kind of way that they go about the work.
You can eat a mouse in one bite.
Yeah, and you can't grow, no matter what you do, you can't grow a mouse into an elephant. It doesn't work. It's not structured like that, right? So I do know, the way I have been careful about structuring the organization so that we can have growth without too much operational kind of friction, right? The way that we are set up now, if 1,000 orders came in tomorrow, we'd be fine. That wouldn't have been the case 2 years ago when we were trying to get, everything set up. But I think because our end goal is not endless growth and is not, just more users, more clicks, more engagement, more subscribers. There's only so many people that are going to want to have this conversation. And I think for me, what I'm just trying to do is hold on for long enough and attract enough support, either from, subscribers, partnerships for advertising. I don't even want to do traditional advertising. I kind of want to just do organizations who are aligned. So you can imagine, we just formed an editorial partnership with a journal called Cosmos, a journal for global transformation. And they may be doing something to support us. But I don't want to sell Cheetos ads in the magazine also, because I don't want to get into the product side of it either and have any of that, be influencing what we're doing. So to me, the fact that we are a business doesn't preclude us from growing and growing and growing, but the DNA of the project isn't CNN. It's a regional print publication, and that does have a bit of a circumscribed subscriber base, even though we have subscribers from all around the country because they're interested in this conversation. It's just a different animal entirely.
Do you think the DNA of CNN was like CNN today when they originally started?
It probably went through iterations. I mean, because it was, that was just when my memory of when it originally started is it was literally this is what's happening on the floor of Congress right now, just unedited videos. But once it started to go over into a news organization, it fell into the same pit that everybody else did.
Yeah. And at the core of that, that basically is just the the profit mandate in capitalism. And I'm a capitalist. I'm not gonna go all Marxist or whatever, but this is what every company mandates, when the only thing that companies have to be responsible for is shareholder value. bottom line profit, then like that is what they will always optimize for. They literally can't do anything else.
They're
The CEO would
legally
be
bound.
fired if they tried to
Yeah.
do something else.
They're legally
So at the
required
end,
to do that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, and it, and so you can't even like blame them in a sense, even though, someone who is continuing to perpetuate that at the head of one of these organizations is a very vile creature, in my opinion. But, so in a way, they're like, the only thing that ever gets done in organizations is what gets measured and what gets gold. And so the only way to get anything done, and this is what you see in, I don't want to just like sit here hate the government all the time, but what metrics are they measuring? What goals are there? A lot of it just seems to be kind of rhetoric of like what's going to be done. One of the things, again, I was a big Andrew Yang fan, still am. He talked about this thing called the American Scorecard, where he was like, here are 10 different metrics that if we reported on them like every quarter, we could actually improve people's lives, like rate of family formation, new businesses starting, mental health statistics. Whereas literally the only thing that ever really gets talked about and measured in society is basically the GDP numbers and like
Exactly.
unemployment, which is
And they
a
don't
farce
care
of a
whether you
number.
built a school or a prison.
Not at all. And so some of these numbers will be talked about as like squishy or like woo woo, like mental health. But if we actually had a mandate to figure out how to measure this, like we would figure that out. And if companies had a mandate to where, if there was some incentive for Facebook to make people's mental health better, they would be able to build a killer product that got people to like somehow use their time on the app to like improve their life. Like they would do that and they'd be really good at it. But it's more profitable to just have engagement for the sake of engagement and keep people on. And so that's kind of what they are mandated and have to do. And so, I mean, to Heather's point where she said she's a business, but they have different views and kind of a different DNA. And there's all these different things like B Corps and public benefit corporations, and like those are the things, because everything just happens because of incentives. And right now, it's the only incentive for big media companies is to make their news more polarizing, is to demonize the other side more. That is what they have found out will bring them the maximum profit, and it's only going to get more and more crazy in that way over time. And because the industry is like dying essentially because of the internet and independent kind of journalism, thankfully. But it'll be a long slog full of many ruined people, unfortunately, as they continue to kind of go down. But you don't get anything that you don't measure. And I would just love to see people talk more about like actual hard measurements that we could implement that would improve like our country. And like we need to be talking about that and forcing politicians to talk about it, and as opposed to just the economy is great because GDP is up. And I know that's a proxy and there's some truth to it, but it definitely is not robust enough to account for the breadth of like well-being in a country.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And if you have corporations, as Cody was just saying, who like they are legally obligated to maximize shareholder value. I'm a privately owned company. I'm an LLC, sole proprietorship. I don't have to worry about that. So what I say goes. So that's one of the ways that I can control all of that. But the point that, back to the fourth estate thing again, like if you're talking about the nobility and our new nobility, at least, and I'm not advocating for a system based on noblesse oblige, but like at least in the old system there was some oblige, right? There was some of that like obligation to help the poor, to measure the right things, to to do whatever. Now there is no obligation to help anyone, right? There is no in fact, you are disincentivized to do that if it goes against your profit margin. And the case of teenage girls in Facebook is a really good example of that. So I don't know where that leaves us other than, again, going back to shrinking everything down, going back to communities of people that can actually relate to one another on a one-on-one way, and then finding leaders within those systems to be able to go back into the systems that they're in and inculcate people with those kinds of values. Like, I just don't see a way around people not having to get back to kind of first principles on these things and decide community by community, state by state, region by region, how they want to handle this. And one of the things that in case there are any people out there who are listening to this that have kind of sway over this, that also means what foundations are giving to. And I can tell you that from a foundation standpoint here in this region, they do not care about arts and culture coverage. They don't care about ideas coverage. They mostly only care about news, even if it's at the community level. And so how are we going to convene these other conversations that have to do with philosophy and science and religion and art and beauty and some of the other things that actually bring us together and cut across some of these political divides that are driving wedges more deeply and deeply into our national fabric until it's just so rent that we can't put it back together anymore?
Yeah, and that's probably a great place to wrap up and kind of summarize, because I looked up, how long has censorship been going on? And to what you were saying, Heather, as long as there have been records kept or, in small publications, there has been the power to censor the information. But maybe we can look at it like this, like where when it was small publications, people can easily censor all of it or just control who could see it. But now there's a mountain of information, of course, but now we have so much more access than anybody has ever had in the world. And if we can it's not to have somebody else for us shrink it. It's for us to shrink what we're looking at, right? And I keep finding the same thing with different episodes for everybody. Obviously, we talked about Root Quarterly before. We talked to our partners at Second Look News, and they're the same idea where they have a website and they're taking just a slower second look at big stories. We talked to the Forward Party. We've talked to a number of people that we talk about. Just look at your local government. Look at your local stories. Slow it down. Don't look at everything going on. I live in Indiana. Why would I look at the local news in Florida or in Pennsylvania or anything like that? It's not going to affect me on on my daily life necessarily. So hopefully, there's going to be censorship, but now we have so many ways around it, and maybe we just have to agree that, it's gonna be there, but now we have to just step around the roadblock and look at other options, look at other roads that we can take.
Root Quarterly is the new samizdat. It's like you have to be able to find us, and we're kind of underground, giving people the healthy information that they need.
Well, for everybody, tell everybody what's going on again with Root Quarterly and where to find you.
Yeah, you can find us at rootquarterly.com, and you can subscribe to the magazine. Right now, if you are in America, we're working on international subscriptions because there's a lot of folks in Canada and Australia that have been pinging us that want access to it. But it's really easy. You go to the website and you subscribe to a magazine, and we send it to you in the mail 4 times a year, and it gets to be like Christmas, and there's beautiful art and, good solid writing and thinking and differing opinions on things, and a good mix of both what's going on here from a regional art perspective and what's going on a national ideas perspective. And we love putting it together. It's the most rewarding project that I've ever worked on, and I really believe strongly that it's important to the health of our communities and our country to have regional media that actually cares about the place that it's from.
Yeah, and I need to get you guys my new address because I moved and I'm not getting the magazine right now. So I need to get that in.
We got to figure it out.
Yeah, and Cody, what are you working on? Anything you want to tell everybody?
I just wanted to
find you.
Yeah, I wanted to. So I really love that. Struck me when Heather said. I thought that was really beautiful when she said it's like Christmas, and just the thought of kind of like purposefully like delaying things and kind of like using that as a chance for a little bit of like surprise and enjoyment and savoring things. Social media has really programmed us to like just continue to flip through things and information very quickly. Yeah. It's okay, what are the news stories of the day? Okay, I know the news. I scrolled through Twitter but that concept of not needing to know, be up to date as soon as possible, because that in a way is like that actually it does make you like less informed in a way and kind of less capable of sussing things out and taking things apart and thinking in a measured and like positive way. So I'll sign up for it, Heather. I thought that was really neat.
One more subscriber.
I don't. Yeah. I don't have really anything to push in terms of upstate North Carolina. Upstate NC is a startup I work with. I guess you can follow me on Twitter, even though I've been hating on it. Cody RH 2020. But yeah, I would love to get more involved in this kind of community here as well. So I appreciate all the insight you guys gave, and I wrote a few things down that I'm going to look up. So,
all right, great. Thanks again so much, Heather and Cody, for joining us today, and we appreciate your time so much. It's been great.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for watching the UnityNow podcast. We'll be back with another conversation that highlights the political middle ground to unite Americans and end the ideological war. In the meantime, we'd love to hear from you. Please comment below and hit that subscribe button.